The lanterns of the inner palace flicker like dying stars. Perfume lingers in the air, mixed with the faint smell of burning sandalwood. A concubine kneels before a carved screen of dragons and clouds, her silk robes trembling with each breath. In her hands rests a folded veil, thin, white, glimmering softly under the candlelight. Outside, the forbidden city is silent. Inside, a ritual is about to begin. The eunuchs say it is mercy, no pain, no blood, no stain. The emperor has decreed her silence. Her crime, jealousy, whispered insolence, perhaps nothing at all. The chief attendant steps forward, his voice low, almost reverent. The veil unfolds. Light passes through it like water, the same silk once used for bridal garments and imperial banners. As it descends over her face, the world turns muted. The scent of jasmine thickens. Her breath clouds the fabric 1, 2, 3 times, then fades. They say the silk veil execution left no marks, no screams, only serenity. But behind that beauty was precision. Behind that mercy was control. This was not death by violence. It was death by elegance, and it was reserved only for the emperor's women. The Forbidden City was not a palace. It was a labyrinth of control disguised as paradise. Behind its vermilion walls lived thousands of women concubines, attendants, and courtiers, all orbiting around a single man who rarely spoke their names. To the outside world, they were honored, chosen, divine. Inside, they were replaceable. Each woman was trained from childhood to please, to smile, to exist without sound. They learned how to bow at the perfect angle, how to speak without emotion, how to cry silently. Their beauty was their only weapon, but even that was borrowed, painted, powdered, perfumed to the emperor's taste. A single misplaced glance could end a life. The palace was divided into ranks like a living hierarchy of breath. At the top sat the empress, beneath her the noble consorts, then the lesser wives, the attendants, the maids. But no one was safe. Jealousy could be fatal. A whisper could travel through corridors faster than wind, reaching ears that waited to turn beauty into accusation. Every morning began with ceremony. The concubines gathered in silk gowns, each color coded to her rank: gold for the favored, pale jade for the forgotten. They offered tea to the empress and recited blessings for the emperor's health. But their smiles were masks, their words rehearsed, their eyes constantly scanning for danger. In the evenings, silence reigned. Eunuchs moved like shadows through the candlelight, delivering secret notes or summoning the chosen. To be chosen was both an honor and a threat. The emperor's touch could elevate a woman to power or mark her for disappearance. The courtyards bloomed with peonies and plum trees, yet beneath the petals lay stories of women buried without names. They called it the Golden Cage because everything inside shone except freedom. And then there was silk. Silk was the empire's pride, the currency of beauty, the symbol of virtue. It wrapped the emperor's throne, covered the walls, even lined the bedchambers. To gift silk was to honor, to wear silk was to serve, and to die by silk, that was to disappear with dignity. Officially, the court denied the existence of the silk veil execution. It was not recorded in law nor written in the annals of punishment. It was an imperial secret known only to a few trusted attendants and the emperor's personal guard. When a concubine fell out of favor, too jealous, too outspoken, or too clever, the command was whispered, never written: return her to peace. The eunuchs understood. A single nod set the ritual in motion. The condemned woman was not dragged or beaten. She was escorted gently to her chamber, her hair brushed, her robe changed to white. Candles were lit, perfume was burned. Everything looked like a prayer. But the attendants knew the script. They prepared her tea with calming herbs. They laid a silk veil upon a lacquered tray, folded perfectly like an offering to heaven. Sometimes the woman understood immediately. Sometimes she didn't until the veil was lifted. There were no cries, no witnesses, no graves. When morning came, the servant spoke as if she had never existed. Her belongings were distributed, her name erased from the registry. The emperor's harmony remained intact. The palace returned to silence, but silence in the Forbidden City was never peace, it was policy. The emperors understood the psychology of control. To maintain absolute power, they had to be both god and ghost. They allowed their women every luxury: silk robes, jade hairpins, perfumed baths, because comfort made obedience easier. The more delicate their world, the more fragile their freedom. Concubines learned this early. Beauty could be a blessing in the morning and a curse by nightfall. A rumor of ambition, a shadow of envy, a single sigh overheard could summon the veil. And once it was summoned, no one dared speak her name again. The irony was unbearable. Silk, the empire's most precious creation, celebrated across continents for its softness, was also its quietest killer. They said the veil's touch was gentle, almost merciful, but to the women who lived beneath its shadow, it was worse than any blade. Because it didn't just take breath, it took memory. The emperor's secret remained perfect, untarnished. No scandal, no blood. Only serenity. A death so beautiful, it looked like devotion. But this execution was more than a punishment, it was performance. Every thread of silk carried meaning, every gesture was ritual. To understand its horror, we must look closely at the ceremony itself. The silk veil and the empire that worshipped it. There was a reason the silk veil was reserved for the palace. It was too beautiful to belong to death. The ritual had to look serene, graceful, divine. To the empire, execution was a ceremony, not an act of violence. Even death was expected to obey. When the order was given, no guards stormed the room, no chains rattled. Instead, the condemned concubine was summoned in secret, told she was being honored with a private audience. She would walk through quiet corridors, her slippers barely whispering against the jade tiles. Lanterns glowed low and golden. The fragrance of lotus oil filled the air, sweet enough to mask fear. The ritual chamber was simple, an empty hall draped in white silk. No audience, no applause, only a single lacquered table and the veil resting upon it. The silk itself was flawless, woven in Suzhou, spun from threads so fine they shimmered like light. It had once been worn by queens during weddings, by dancers in imperial courts. Now it was repurposed as the empire's most silent weapon. The chief attendant performed the ritual. His movements were rehearsed, almost tender. The woman knelt as he read the decree aloud, her crimes listed in tones that never rose above courtesy. Disobedience, jealousy, insolence, witchcraft. Sometimes the reason was political, sometimes it was simply the emperor's boredom. In the Forbidden City, even silence could offend. Then came the preparation. The condemned was asked to drink a small cup of warm wine to calm her spirit. Attendants brushed her hair, tying it into a high knot. Her ornaments were removed, no jade, no gold, no memory. The white robe she wore symbolized purity restored. Everything about her death had to look like peace. When she was ready, the veil was lifted. It fluttered in the air, whispering as it moved. The attendant stretched it wide, its surface glimmering like moonlight. The woman's breath trembled. As the silk descended, the world around her seemed to fade. She could see light through it, could almost believe it was gentle. Then the ritual began. The silk was drawn tighter, not by hands, but by design. It had been treated with a fine layer of resin that stiffened with heat and moisture. Each exhale from the woman's mouth warmed the fabric slightly, causing it to contract. Her own breath became her executioner. Within minutes, the veil clung to her face, sealing nose and mouth. The attendants stood motionless, their eyes lowered. No one spoke. The first minutes were almost silent, save for the faint rustle of fabric. The woman's breath grew louder, shallow and quick, each gasp making the silk quiver. Then the trembling slowed. Her body swayed. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, began to twitch. But the veil remained spotless, pure, undisturbed. Some versions of the ritual used ribbons of silk instead of a single sheet. They were wrapped delicately around the neck and jaw, layer by layer, as if dressing her for a portrait. Each loop symbolized one of the 7 virtues of womanhood. By the 7th, her breath was gone. There was no blood, no scream, no sound of violence. The attendants bowed once and left her kneeling. Within an hour, she would appear asleep, her skin pale, her expression peaceful. Her body would later be placed in a lacquered chest, her face still covered, the veil never removed. The official record would say she retired to silence. One legend speaks of concubine Zhao Lian, whose death became whispered poetry. She had been accused of using forbidden incense to enchant the emperor's dreams. When they came for her, she smiled and said, "Then let me die as fragrance." Witnesses claimed that as the veil tightened, she continued to sing, her voice fading until it dissolved into breath. The emperor later ordered that no music be played in the palace for a year. But the ritual was never about guilt. It was about control. The silk veil became a language the court understood without words, a reminder that beauty could be reshaped into obedience, that silence was the empire's most powerful law. Foreign envoys who visited the palace marveled at its serenity, never knowing how much of it was manufactured by fear. Even the empress, untouchable in title, lived beneath the same invisible thread. Every woman in the palace knew her favor could end the moment her voice reached the wrong ear, and so the veil hung folded, perfumed, waiting. It became a symbol not of death, but of order. The emperor's peace depended on it. His women were living ornaments, their beauty and submission defining the perfection of his reign. No chronicler dared write about the ritual, yet traces survived in poems, in coded paintings, in the way artists began to depict women with veils drawn across their faces, serene and voiceless. Art imitated death, and death imitated art. They called it Ling Luo Zhe Xing, the punishment of the silken breath. It was designed to be elegant, efficient, and eternal, a death so quiet it echoed louder than screams. But the silk did more than kill, it taught. It showed a civilization how easily silence could be disguised as virtue. And centuries later, its whisper still lingers wherever beauty is used to hide cruelty. Centuries have passed since the last silk veil fell, yet its echo still drifts through the forbidden city. Tourists walk its courtyards now, their footsteps tracing the same marble paths once lined with kneeling women. They admire the gold, the lacquer, the symmetry. They whisper about the splendor of emperors, but at night, when the wind stirs the old curtains, it sounds like the faint breath of someone who never finished exhaling. The empire that created the silk veil believed that silence was perfection. It taught its people that stillness was the highest form of grace, that women who obeyed were divine, and those who spoke were dangerous. The veil was more than execution, it was ideology, woven into the very fabric of the dynasty. And though the emperors are gone, the idea survives. In modern language, in art, in culture, the same philosophy lingers. We still praise silence as dignity. We still mistake endurance for virtue. We still wrap our cruelties in beauty and call them traditions. The silk veil was a masterpiece of control because it killed without confrontation. It made the victim complicit in her own disappearance. There was no spectacle, no rebellion, only breath turning into quiet. That was the genius of it, its ability to erase a person so gently that the world applauded the serenity of her death. In ancient court records, scribes wrote that the veil represented mercy. But mercy, when defined by power, is only another form of dominance. What emperors called compassion was simply efficiency. They found a way to make silence look divine. The stories of the veiled concubines live on in fragments poems attributed to anonymous women, paintings of faceless figures surrounded by silk drapery. Each piece is beautiful, but beauty here is a disguise, a veil of its own. Beneath every polished surface lies the same truth. History has always preferred its women quiet. Sometimes, late at night, guards at the Palace Museum claim to hear rustling from the sealed storage rooms like fabric brushing across the floor. They joke that it's the ghosts of the concubines adjusting their veils, making sure they are still unseen. But even ghosts cannot scream through silk. And perhaps that is what the emperors feared most, not death, not rebellion, but the sound of women who refused to be erased. The silk veil execution was not about killing, it was about preserving power, about sculpting obedience into legend. The emperors wanted their palaces to sound like temples, not prisons. Silence was proof of control, yet silence never lasts forever. Every empire that worships quiet eventually drowns in its own echoes. The dynasties fell, the temples crumbled, and the silks that once shimmered with authority now lie frayed and yellowed in museum drawers. But their meaning remains whenever a voice is softened for comfort, whenever truth is wrapped in politeness, whenever fear is dressed in beauty. The silk veil has simply changed form. It's no longer draped over the condemned. It hangs invisibly in the air we breathe. In every system that demands silence in the name of harmony, in every rule that values appearance over honesty, the veil returns. History calls it a punishment, but it was also prophecy, because every time we mistake silence for peace, the empire of the silk veil rises again.